A girl named Theano is kneeling in the wet sand of Phaleron, her fingers digging into the grit until her nails bleed. Behind her, Athens is a column of black smoke leaning against the horizon. In front of her stands a man named Harem. He isn't a soldier. He doesn't carry a spear. He carries a stylus and a stack of damp clay tablets. He doesn't look at her face. He looks at her wrists, checking for the telltale signs of loom work or the soft skin of the aristocracy. He reaches out, forcing her mouth open with a thumb to check the alignment of her teeth. To Vahram, Theano isn't a person. She is a data point, a line item in the Royal Directorate of Household Integration. This is the part of the Persian Wars the statues don't show you. We're told of the 300 Spartans. We're told of the wooden walls of the Athenian navy. But while the men were dying for freedom, 40,000 Greek women were being processed like grain. The year is 479 BC. The Persian fleet is shattered, but the empire's bureaucracy is just getting started. Among the chaos of the retreat, a high-stakes mistake occurs. A young woman named Myrto, the daughter of a prominent archon, attempts to destroy a small embroidered silk sash, a garment that identifies her as a priestess of Athena. If the Persians find it, she becomes a high-value political asset. She tries to bury it in the embers of a cooking fire. But she's too slow. A Persian supervisor, a man named Arshama, catches the scent of burning silk. He doesn't strike her. He simply watches as his men retrieve the charred remains. He notes her lineage on his tablet. Her fate, and the fate of her entire bloodline, is sealed not by a sword, but by a record. History books use the word slavery. It's too clean. It suggests a simple exchange of labor. What Xerxes implemented was a system of cultural liquidation. The women weren't just taken, they were categorized. Girls under 12 were sent to the interior schools in Susa. Women over 30 were moved to the Northwood logistics hubs in Thrace to grind grain until their joints fused. But the ones in the middle, the ones like Theano and Myrto, were the priority. They were marched east, away from the salt air of the Aegean and into the suffocating dust of Asia Minor. At the transition camps in Sardis, the erasure began. The Persians knew that physical chains are breakable, psychological ones are not. They didn't beat the Greek out of them. They starved them of it. They were forbidden from speaking their mother tongue. Every time a girl used a Greek word for water or mother, her rations were cut. Every time she used the Persian equivalent, she was given a piece of fruit. It was a slow, methodical rewiring of the brain. By the time they reached the heart of the empire, the women were unrecognizable. There is an account of a woman named Ione. She had been a noblewoman in Megara. After 3 years in the Royal Directorate, she was presented to a Persian satrap as a gift. When she saw a group of Greek prisoners being led past the estate, she didn't cry out. She didn't try to help them. She spat on the ground and called them barbarians in perfect, unaccented Persian. She had been hollowed out and refilled with the empire. This was the harem in its true form. Not a place of silk cushions, but a factory for genetic colonialism. These women were forced to bear children who would never know they were half Greek. These children would grow up to be the administrators, the tax collectors, and the soldiers who would eventually return to Greece to tax their own cousins. It was the ultimate revenge. Xerxes didn't need to burn Athens again. He was simply going to outbreed it. pressure inside these holding centers was absolute. In late 479 BC, at a camp near the ruins of Sardis, the tension finally snapped. A group of 20 women, led by a former weaver named Cruelty, realized they were being moved to the deep interior, a place from which no one returned. Cruelty didn't lead a revolt with weapons. She led a silent strike. They refused to eat. They refused to speak. They sat in the center of the camp, staring west toward the sea they would never see again. The Persian commander didn't respond with a massacre. He knew that martyrs are dangerous. Instead, he brought in their children. He told Cruelty that for every hour she remained silent, a different child would be sent to the mines in the Far East. Cruelty looked at her daughter. She looked at the commander. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to beg for a quick death. But the words that came out weren't Greek. They were Persian. She had already lost. If you want to see the moment the last spark of Athenian resistance was extinguished in the heart of Persia, you need to subscribe right now. Because what the records reveal next is a betrayal that history tried to bury for 2 millennia. Join the few who look past the myths. Subscribe. The silence that followed Cruelty's submission was the sound of a nation dying. Decades later, when the wars were over and a few of these women were finally ransomed or escaped, they returned to a Greece that didn't want them. Theano was one of them. She made it back to the ruins of her village near the foothills of Attica. She was 40 years old. She spoke with a heavy Persian lilt. She had a son with her, a boy with Persian eyes who didn't understand why his mother was crying at a pile of blackened stones. Her family didn't embrace her. They looked at her as if she were a ghost, or worse, a collaborator. The Athenian law was clear. Any woman who had stayed with the barbarians was considered polluted. She was barred from the temples. She was barred from the markets. Theano, who had survived the march, the re-education, and the king's directorate, couldn't survive the silence of her own people. She walked back to the coast. She sat on the same beach where Harem had first inspected her teeth. She took a sharp stone and carved a single sentence into a piece of driftwood before walking into the surf. Archaeologists didn't find the wood, but they found the sentiment repeated in a mass grave discovered in the 1950s. 300 skeletons of women, all facing west. They weren't killed in battle. They didn't die of a plague. They died of a system that realized that to kill a people, you don't need to take their lives. You just need to take their names. The 300 Spartans got the marble monuments. The women of Athens got the silence. But the clay tablets, the cold bureaucratic records of Harem and his stylists, they don't lie. They tell the story of a victory that felt exactly like a funeral. The past isn't a story of heroes. It's a ledger of what was lost while the heroes were busy making speeches. If you're willing to hear the voices they tried to erase, welcome to the Scarlet Archives. We're just getting started, getting